My name is Mia Bow, and we are at my exhibition Nocturnal House at Roslyn Oxley9 Gallery. I named the exhibition Nocturnal House because when I was doing a residency in Alice Springs, there's this place called Desert Park, which is like a wildlife reserve place, and there's a part of the reserve that's called Nocturnal House, and the animals in there sort of live in reverse. So during the day it's really dark inside, and so you can see all the sort of bilbies and other sort of nocturnal animals running around. And it was quite bizarre going in there because it's 40 degrees outside and sunny, and then you step inside and it's quiet, and it's blue light, and you just see all these animals you would never see running around in the desert. And it kind of made me a bit sad for them because they just live in this reverse life, that like this manufactured sort of setting. Well, when I was in Alice Springs, I found the night times the most beautiful, especially going for walks in the desert, and like the intensity of the colours and the sounds and how everything would change when the sun went down and what animals came out. And it added to this sense of sort of melancholy and feeling this like vast, amazing landscape around you. And when I was making the paintings, I sort of approached it with trying to capture that feeling. And when I was first planning this exhibition, the general theme was nighttime. That's sort of how I looked at making it, just because I was alone when I was in Alice Springs, and at nighttime I felt the most alone, so trying to capturing that feeling in these paintings. Yeah, so when I went to Alice Springs, it was my 4th time going there, and the other few times I had been to Alice Springs was to watch my dad work. He is one of the lawyers for the Kumanjayi Walker family, so a very important death in custody case from 2019. And so my experience there had been very much going to the courthouse, hearing this tragic story. And so going back for the residency, I was going with all that context for myself, and just like wanting to experience a town, which in Alice Springs is a very intense town. It's beautiful, but a lot of Aboriginal people that live there have moved from different communities around there, and this historic sort of forcible removal in that history. So there's so many deep-rooted issues in Alice Springs, and at the same time there's all these sort of government agencies and charities and not-for-profits that are trying to fix these problems, but they're sort of all part of this ecosystem of issues, and not quite there's been years of trying to fix these problems, but it just seems like it's getting worse and worse, and people are getting poorer and poorer and more disenfranchised. And so when I was there, I felt like this observer of all these issues, but also of all this culture as well, and beauty. So when I came back from the residency and I started making this exhibition, I wanted to capture the complexities of this place, and also acknowledging my own, personal experience in this town. When I was planning this exhibition and working out what artworks would be in the exhibition, I approached it a bit differently to my other shows. Like, typically I have a very clear idea of like a story or a historical reference for an exhibition, whereas this one I wanted to be a bit more intuitive with it, and take from my residency in Alice Springs, but also from my personal life, and like try and not be so exact or like descriptive in the work. So like some of them I don't have very clear explanations for, but the painting I'm So Afraid for My People, so the title of that's taken from a protest sign that I saw from a recent death in custody of Kumanjayi White, and I wanted to sort of create a landscape that reflected the complexities of Alice Springs, and I sort of see Alice Springs as this sort of example of the intense racism that we see all across the country, but Alice Springs especially, it's like this hot spot for these like segregation of the country. And there's various figures in it, and they're sort of faceless and they're kind of silhouettes. The like men or the people in suits at the top of the painting are sort of, you know, representations of, I guess, like industry people, or, you know, people that moved to areas like Alice Springs as lawyers or policymakers, and they're sort of there's a bit of indifference to them, and they're just sort of studying these tragedies. And you know, one of them's holding a magnifying glass onto these, I guess, tombs almost at the bottom, or these figures, these like graves, and it's sort of just showing this like disconnect of, you know, reality. And I also wanted to, you know, mention the failure of the Yes campaign. So I wrote, you know, no in stars up in the top corner, almost like a flag, sort of similar to our Australian flag, the Southern Cross in a way. And like, I think although there was hope for the Yes campaign, like I actually never thought it would be successful, just because of the reality of attitudes in Australia. And then in the corner, I've painted a diorama that I made when I was in Alice Springs, and I was just sort of experimenting with making these sort of figures out of clay that represented spirits, and sort of just to sort of like experiment with this idea of like world making and world building, as a sort of attempt of sort of depicting this desire for escapism. Yeah, the painting, This Is How We Walk on the Moon. So the title is taken from an Arthur Russell song that I listened to a lot while I was at my residency, and especially when I was driving from Alice Springs to Melbourne, that song played a lot. And so there's so many like memories attached to that song of driving through this like very intense landscape, especially around Cooper PD, and seeing all like the old opal mines, and sort of all these holes just in this landscape from like these not failed, but like not in use anymore, opal machinery. So it's sort of a dystopian fantasy landscape. The like structure on the left is a interpretation of like a mining machinery extracting from the land, and there's sort of nothing coming out of it because it's just been sort of extracted beyond its capacity. And there's these sort of ghostly four figures that appear in a few other paintings, and they were also sort of figures that I had made out of clay when I was there to sort of depict a spirit figure in a way, a presence. And they're sort of like watching over the land and scanning the land. And along the bottom of the painting, there's some crazy fire ants. And at the moment, they are a big risk to my ancestral country, Gari. They're an invasive species, and they just destroy ecosystems. So yeah, some bringing it back to, you know, reality in that sense. And then in the sky, there's this man sitting next to a tent with a Aboriginal flag. And I first did that sort of figure in an exhibition a couple of years ago when I was responding to Lionel Fogarty's poems. And I think it was from the poem Saints Are Homeless by Lionel Fogarty. And it's a really beautiful poem, and I just sort of wanted to depict this feeling of being homeless on one's own homeland, and this disconnect and this, you know, desire to escape this fantasy. But like, you know, the reality is like people wouldn't actually want to leave their country. It's not by choice. It's sort of this forced, you know, sense of escapism that I'm trying to depict. Yeah, I used to be really obsessed with surrealism, but it's so specific to its time. So like, I feel like, you know, I was attracted to how artists were responding to war times, specifically, and using symbols to depict all, you know, dreams and inner thoughts and the subconscious. So I think there's definitely, elements of that in my work. So for the painting, All Around You, Not a Sound, the title is from a song called Drifting Falling by a band called The Ocean Blue. And it was a song I had heard when I was in Alice Springs in like the one nightclub in town called the Black Reef. And it's quite a joyful song, but it's about like, going through life, and eventually you like realize like, where are all my friends? And they're like, you've been drifting and falling like all around you, not a sound. Like you're like, wait, I'm alone. That's the song. And I mean, I did name all the paintings after I'd finished them, but I feel like that one made sense for that because, like, I suppose a lot of the females in the paintings in this show are self-portraits, and that one especially, like, I think captured this idea of being like a bit voyeuristic while I was in my residency, and the eyes again are sort of, I guess, traces of a sort of presence or spirits that I can't quite, name, but just this sense of feeling alone, but not alone at the same time. Yeah, so the painting Planet of Thought, that's another Arthur Russell song, song title. And I suppose it's, going with the rest of the exhibition, this experience of, I guess, feeling outside of myself, and the figure on the left is a self-portrait of sorts, and I've sort of painted this, cinema, and the figure's watching this scene, and in my mind it's sort of her watching herself from outside of herself, to sort of process emotions. And I've, at the bottom of the painting, I've included these movie posters, and they're sort of references to paintings in this exhibition. I made these sculptures that looked like that when I was in Alice Springs making dioramas, and then I'd drawn these sort of them as these spirit figures and they come up in a few paintings, and I just wanted to do some sort of, portrait of them, and then like the person or the figure on the right is sort of this observer, and I feel like that idea of being an observer comes up in a lot of the paintings, especially in like the cinema ones, and like also in the painting The Warning, I feel like the figures are all staring at the viewer, and it's like you're being watched and studied. So yeah, it's definitely trying to capture that sense of being an observer in a landscape.